The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cherry Creek, Nevada, as Declan Frost stood at the stagecoach platform, nervously adjusting his freshly ironed collar. His heart hammered against his ribs as the distant rumble of wheels announced the imminent arrival of his mail-order bride, a woman whose face he knew only from a small, faded photograph, and whose words he had only read through translated letters arranged by the marriage agency. It was 1878, and at 32 years of age, Declan had finally admitted that the isolated life of a cattle rancher 10 miles outside Cherry Creek wasn't conducive to finding a wife through conventional means. 6 months ago, he had taken the bold step of placing an advertisement in a European marriage gazette, offering a home, stability, and respectful treatment to any woman willing to journey to Nevada to be his bride. What he hadn't fully comprehended, when corresponding with the beautiful Daria Sokolov from a small village outside St. Petersburg, was that upon her arrival, they would share no common language. The marriage broker had translated their letters, creating an illusion of direct communication that would shatter the moment they met face to face. The stagecoach appeared on the horizon, trailing dust in its wake as it approached Cherry Creek. Declan smoothed back his sandy brown hair, took a deep breath, and straightened his posture. His ranch foreman and closest friend, Miguel Hernandez, gave him a supportive clap on the shoulder. "Ready to meet your Russian bride, Jeef?" Miguel asked with a grin. "As ready as I'll ever be," Declan replied, his voice betraying his anxiety. "What if she takes one look at me and wants to climb right back onto that stagecoach? Then you better hope the driver's already headed to the saloon," Miguel joked, but quickly adopted a more reassuring tone. "She won't. You've got a good heart, a profitable ranch, and you're not as ugly as most of the other bachelors in this county." The stagecoach rolled to a stop with a creak of springs and a cloud of dust. The driver secured the reins and hopped down to open the door. Declan's mouth went dry as he spotted a slender hand accept the driver's assistance. A woman emerged, blinking in the harsh Nevada sunlight. Daria Sokolov was smaller than he'd imagined, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple bun, though several strands had escaped during the journey, framing a heart-shaped face with high cheekbones and eyes the color of a summer storm. She wore a modest blue traveling dress, somewhat wrinkled from the long journey, and clutched a small carpetbag in one hand. The photograph hadn't done her justice. Despite the obvious exhaustion in her posture, she was strikingly beautiful. Declan stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Sokolov." "I'm Declan Frost." Her eyes widened slightly at the sound of her name, and she smiled tentatively. "Declan," she said, her accent thick but his name recognizable on her lips. He nodded encouragingly, then gestured to himself. "Yes, Declan." The driver unloaded her trunk and collected his fee from Declan. As the stagecoach departed, an awkward silence fell between them. Several townsfolk had stopped to observe the meeting, curiosity evident in their stares. Miguel came to the rescue, introducing himself with exaggerated gestures and a friendly smile. "Miguel Hernandez, Señorita. Amigo de Declan." Daria nodded politely, but her eyes returned to Declan, questioning and perhaps a bit fearful. He realized with a jolt that she had traveled thousands of miles to marry a man with whom she couldn't even have a simple conversation. "Well," he said, knowing she wouldn't understand but feeling the need to break the silence, "let's get you settled at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. You can rest, and tomorrow we'll see Reverend Thomas about the wedding, if you're still willing." He gestured toward the boarding house down the street, then mimed sleeping by tilting his head against his hands. Daria's brow furrowed momentarily before understanding dawned. She nodded and took a step in the indicated direction. Miguel picked up her trunk. "I'll help you get the señorita settled, then head back to the ranch to tell the boys everything's on schedule." As they walked down Cherry Creek's main street, Declan was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. Daria kept her eyes downcast, but he noticed her taking in details of the frontier town so different from her Russian homeland. "This must all seem very strange to you," he said softly, not expecting her to understand his words, but hoping his tone conveyed empathy. She glanced up at him, and for a moment their eyes locked. There was intelligence in her gaze and determination. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin slightly, as if to say she was not intimidated by the challenge before them. Mrs. Wilson, a plump widow in her 50s who ran the town's only respectable boarding house, greeted them at the door with barely contained curiosity. "So this is your bride-to-be, Mr. Frost. She's a pretty little thing, isn't she?" Mrs. Wilson looked Daria up and down. "Though I hear she doesn't speak a word of English." "That's right, Mrs. Wilson. This is Miss Daria Sokolov from Russia," Declan confirmed, conscious of how Daria tensed beside him at hearing her name. "She'll be staying here until the wedding tomorrow, if that's still agreeable." Of course," Mrs. Wilson nodded, then addressed Daria directly and too loudly as if volume might bridge the language gap. "You must be exhausted, dear. Let me show you to your room." Daria flinched slightly at the volume but smiled politely. Mrs. Wilson took her arm and began guiding her toward the stairs, still chattering away despite the obvious communication barrier. Declan called after them. "Mrs. Wilson, could you please tell her?" He stopped, realizing the futility. "Never mind. I'll return in the morning to escort her to the church." He watched as Daria glanced back over her shoulder, her expression a mixture of uncertainty and resignation. Their eyes met once more, and he tipped his hat, hoping to convey reassurance. Her small, answering smile gave him a flicker of hope before she disappeared up the stairs. "She seems nice," Miguel commented as they headed back out to the street. "Scared, but who wouldn't be?" "I didn't think this through, Miguel," Declan admitted, troubled. "How are we supposed to build a life together when we can't even talk to each other?" "You'll find a way," Miguel replied with confidence. "My grandmother couldn't speak a word of English when she married my grandfather. They figured it out." "How?" Declan asked desperately. "They learned together," Miguel said simply. "You'll teach her English. Maybe she'll teach you Russian." Love has its own language, Jeef. That night, alone in his room at Cherry Creek's small hotel, Declan couldn't sleep. He paced the worn floorboards, troubled by doubts. Was it fair to expect Daria to marry him tomorrow when they couldn't even have a conversation? What had he been thinking, bringing her all this way? He pulled out the translated letters they had exchanged, rereading her careful descriptions of her life in Russia, her hopes for a new beginning in America after losing her parents to illness, her assurances that she understood the challenges ahead, but was prepared to face them. In the last letter she had written, "I know we will face difficulties, but I believe with patience and kindness we can build a good life together." Patience and kindness. It seemed so simple on paper. Dawn found him at the general store the moment it opened, purchasing a Russian English dictionary the shopkeeper had ordered for him weeks ago, but that Declan had forgotten to collect. It was thin and likely inadequate, but it was a start. By mid-morning, Declan stood in his best suit outside the boarding house, hat in hand, dictionary tucked into his pocket, and a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched awkwardly in his grip. When Mrs. Wilson opened the door, her expression was uncharacteristically solemn. "Mr. Frost, I think you should come in." His stomach dropped. "Is something wrong? Is she ill?" "No, nothing like that," Mrs. Wilson assured him, leading him to the small sitting room. "She's just Well, she's been crying, poor thing. I found her this morning at the window, looking out like she might run away. Can't say I blame her, coming all this way to marry a stranger whose words she can't understand. Before Declan could respond, Daria appeared in the doorway. She'd clearly made an effort with her appearance. Her hair was neatly arranged with small white flowers woven into the braids, and she wore a simple cream-colored dress that he guessed was her best. But her red-rimmed eyes betrayed her earlier tears. "Good morning," he said softly, then clumsily consulted his dictionary. De Broy Utro, her eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled slightly as she smiled. De Broy Utro Declan. He held out the wildflowers, feeling suddenly boyish and awkward. "For you, Delia Vass." His pronunciation was undoubtedly terrible, but her smile widened as she accepted the bouquet. "Spasibo," she replied, bringing the flowers to her nose. "That means thank you," he told Mrs. Wilson, inordinately proud of himself for recognizing the word. Mrs. Wilson looked between them with newfound understanding. "Well, it seems you two are already finding your way. Shall I leave you to talk or whatever it is you're doing?" Once alone, Declan pulled out the small leather-bound dictionary. He pointed to it, then between them, hoping she'd understand his intention to bridge their language gap. Daria's eyes lit with intelligence and relief. She nodded enthusiastically. He fumbled through the pages, trying to form a simple question. "Vi, gotovi, vichti za menya zamaj." "Are you ready to marry me?" She looked startled, then thoughtful. After a long moment, she reached for the dictionary herself. Her fingers, delicate but work-hardened, traced the pages until she found what she was looking for. Pakamu. Why, the simplicity of her question struck him. Why indeed? Why had he sent for a bride from halfway across the world? Why should she marry him when they were complete strangers who couldn't even communicate? He couldn't answer in Russian, so he spoke from the heart in English, hoping his sincerity would transcend the language barrier. "Because I promise to be a good husband to you, Daria. I'll work every day to make a good life for us. I'll learn your language and help you learn mine. We'll build something together, if you'll give us a chance." She watched his lips move, clearly trying to grasp his meaning from his expression. Then she surprised him by reaching out to touch his hand lightly. "Da," she said softly. "Yes." The wedding was a simple affair at Cherry Creek's small white church. Reverend Thomas conducted the ceremony with deliberate slowness, guiding Daria through her responses with patient gestures. Miguel stood as Declan's best man, and Mrs. Wilson, having appointed herself Daria's American protector, served as matron of honor. When Declan slid the simple gold band onto Daria's finger, her hand trembled in his. As he repeated his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish her until death parted them, he wondered if she understood any of the sacred promises being made. But when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the smile that illuminated her face needed no translation. The small gathering of townsfolk and ranch hands who had attended the ceremony joined them for a modest celebration at the town's hotel. Daria stayed close to Declan's side, clearly overwhelmed by the attention and the flow of English conversation around her. He found himself instinctively shielding her, steering her toward quieter corners, making sure she had food and drink, watching for signs of fatigue or distress. As the afternoon wore on, he noticed her stifling yawns. After consulting his dictionary, he whispered, "Usthavshi." Tired, she nodded gratefully. "Da, usthavshi." He made their excuses to the remaining guests and escorted his new wife to the buckboard wagon that would take them to his ranch. Miguel had arranged for their belongings to be loaded earlier, and Daria's trunk was secured in the back. As Declan helped her onto the seat, he was struck by how small and vulnerable she seemed. yet how bravely she faced each new challenge. The 10-mile journey to the ranch passed largely in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Daria gazed with open curiosity at the vast landscape, so different from the Russian forests and fields she had described in her letters. When the wagon crested a hill and the ranch came into view, the sturdy 2-story main house, the barn, the corral, the bunkhouse, all nestled in a verdant valley with mountains rising in the distance, her intake of breath was audible. "Dom," he said, pointing toward the house. "Home." "Dom," she repeated softly, testing the English word on her tongue. As they approached the ranch, several cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse, whooping and hollering their congratulations. Daria shrank against him momentarily before straightening her spine and lifting her chin with determination. Declan felt a surge of admiration for her courage. He helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Her startled laugh was musical, and for a moment, as their eyes met, the language barrier between them seemed inconsequential. The interior of the ranch house was simple, but comfortable. Declan had spent the past months preparing for Daria's arrival, adding feminine touches to what had been a decidedly bachelor's home. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new bedding adorned the beds, and he'd even commissioned a set of china dishes from back east. He set her down gently in the front parlor, watching nervously as she took in her new surroundings. Her expression was unreadable as she moved slowly through the room, trailing her fingertips over the furniture, examining the few family photographs on the mantel. "It's not fancy," he said, knowing she wouldn't understand the words but needing to fill the silence. "But it's solid. And there's room for children someday, if we're blessed that way." She turned to look at him, her head tilted questioningly. He shook his head, embarrassed, and gestured toward the stairs. "Let me show you the rest." He carried her trunk upstairs himself, setting it down in the master bedroom. This room had received the most attention in his preparations. The bed was new, wider than his old one, with a handmade quilt from Mrs. Wilson as a wedding gift. The curtains matched the bedspread, and he'd installed a dressing table by the window with a small mirror. Daria stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. She turned to him with tears glistening in her eyes and said something in Russian, her voice full of emotion. "I don't understand," he said helplessly. She reached for his dictionary, which he still carried in his pocket. After some searching, she pointed to a word, "krasivy." Beautiful relief flooded through him. "You like it," she nodded, understanding his tone if not his exact words. "Da. Spasibo, Declan." That evening, Declan showed her around the ranch, introducing her to the small staff with awkward gestures and simple English words. The cook, Mrs. Garcia, was Miguel's aunt, and she greeted Daria with a warm embrace and a torrent of Spanish that seemed to amuse rather than overwhelm the Russian bride. Perhaps, Declan thought, when you already don't understand the predominant language, adding another to the mix wasn't so intimidating. Their first dinner as husband and wife was served in the dining room, with Mrs. Garcia outdoing herself to welcome the new mistress of the house. Daria's appreciation for the meal transcended language, her expressions of delight making the cook beam with pleasure. As night fell, however, a new awkwardness descended. The realities of their arrangement, two strangers now married, expected to share a life and a bed, couldn't be ignored any longer. Declan showed Daria to the bedroom, then excused himself to give her privacy to prepare for the night. When he returned later, he found her sitting stiffly on the edge of the bed in a modest white nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking terrified. The sight of her fear made a decision for him that he hadn't consciously reached yet. He picked up a spare pillow and blanket from the chest at the foot of the bed. "I'll sleep downstairs," he told her, miming his intention. Until we know each other better." The relief on her face was palpable, followed quickly by what looked like gratitude. She reached for the dictionary that now lay on the bedside table and searched its pages. Finally, she pointed to a word. "D gentleman." "Gentleman," he nodded, hoping she understood that he wouldn't force the physical aspects of marriage upon her. "Good night, Daria. Spokojnej nocy." "Spokojnej nocy, Declan," she replied softly. As he settled onto the sofa in his study, Declan reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He was now a married man, responsible for a young woman who couldn't even tell him if she was happy or miserable, hungry or satisfied, content or regretting her decision with every fiber of her being. He fell asleep with the dictionary clutched in his hand, determined to find a way to bridge the vast gulf between them. The early morning light found Declan already awake, his neck stiff from the sofa but his mind clearer than it had been in days. He had a plan. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was a start. He rose quietly and went to the kitchen, where Mrs. Garcia was already preparing breakfast. "Buenos dias, Señor Frost," she greeted him cheerfully. "How is the new señora this morning?" "Still sleeping, I think," he replied. "Mrs. Garcia, I need your help. I want to learn Russian and I need to teach Daria English, but I don't know where to start." The older woman wiped her hands on her apron and regarded him thoughtfully. "When my children were small, I taught them words by showing them things and naming them. Perhaps this is how you begin, with the everyday objects around you." It was such a simple suggestion that Declan felt foolish for not having thought of it himself. "Thank you. That's exactly what I'll do." He helped himself to coffee and sat at the kitchen table, making a list of essential words they would both need to communicate the basics of daily life. By the time he heard movement upstairs, he had filled several pages of his notebook. Daria appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a simple day dress, her hair neatly braided. She looked uncertain until Declan rose and pulled out a chair for her. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Dobroy utro." "Dobroy utro," she replied, taking the offered seat. Mrs. Garcia placed a cup of coffee before her. "Coffee," Declan said clearly, pointing to the cup. "Coffee." Daria's eyes lit with understanding. "Coffee," she repeated, her accent making the word sound exotic. "And in Russian," he prompted, miming drinking and then pointing to her. "Kof," she replied. Declan grinned. "That's an easy one." And so their language lessons began, starting with breakfast items and continuing throughout the day as Declan showed Daria around the ranch. Each object became an opportunity for exchange. He would name it in English. She would provide the Russian word, and they would practice until both could pronounce the other's language passably well. By evening, they had compiled a modest vocabulary list of household items, ranch animals, and basic commands like come, stop, and help. The process had broken much of the tension between them, replacing awkwardness with the shared accomplishment of communication, however rudimentary. That night, Declan again took his pillow and blanket to the study sofa, but before retiring he showed Daria a new word in the dictionary. "Terpeniai," patience. She smiled and pointed to another, "Vremya," time, patience, and time. It was a promise between them that they would give their unusual marriage a chance to grow into something meaningful. As days turned into weeks, Declan and Daria established a routine. Mornings were spent on ranch work for him and household tasks for her. Though he noticed, she often watched the cattle operations with keen interest. Afternoons included language lessons, which gradually expanded from naming objects to forming simple sentences. Daria proved to be a quick study, her English vocabulary growing rapidly. Declan struggled more with Russian pronunciation, but persisted out of a sense of fairness. If she was learning his language, he would learn hers. Their evenings developed a comfortable pattern. After dinner, they would sit in the parlor, sometimes reading. Declan had ordered primers used to teach children English, which Daria worked through diligently, sometimes simply talking in their developing shared vocabulary. And always, at the end of the evening, Declan would take his pillow and blanket to the study. The arrangement remained unspoken between them. He would not press for the physical consummation of their marriage until Daria indicated she was ready. 1 month into their marriage, Declan returned from a long day of moving cattle to find Daria sitting on the porch, deep in conversation with Miguel's wife, Elena. The two women had formed a friendship despite their language differences, with Elena's broken English serving as a bridge. "What are you ladies discussing so intently?" Declan asked, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. Elena grinned. "I teach Daria to make tamales. She teach me Russian cake. Her English improves every day," Declan noted with pride. She is very smart," Elena agreed, then added with a knowing look, "and very pretty, your wife." Daria blushed, understanding enough to grasp Elena's meaning. "Thank you for lesson," she said carefully to Elena. "Tomorrow we cook." After Elena departed, Daria turned to Declan with newfound confidence. "You are dirty," she said, wrinkling her nose playfully at his dust-covered clothes. He laughed. "Yes, very dirty. I need a bath." Her face grew serious as she considered her next words carefully. "I help with bath." The question caught him off guard, heat rising to his face that had nothing to do with the day's work. "You want to help me bathe?" She nodded, a mixture of determination and shyness in her expression. "I am wife. This is duty." "No," he said quickly, then more gently. "No, Daria, not duty. Only if you want." She considered this, then nodded again, more firmly. "I want to help." That evening marked a shift in their relationship. Daria helped Declan with his bath, her initial nervousness giving way to practical efficiency as she scrubbed his back and washed his hair. The intimacy was not passionate but caring, a wife tending to her husband's needs with gentle hands. Afterward, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Daria surprised him by taking his hand in hers. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. "Beautiful," she said, gesturing toward the sunset with her free hand. "Yes," he agreed, but he was looking at her profile illuminated by the fading light. "Beautiful." She turned to meet his gaze, and something in her expression made his heart race. She leaned toward him slightly, and he understood the invitation. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in their first kiss. It was gentle and brief, a question more than a demand. When they separated, Daria's cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were clear and unafraid. "Tonight," she said softly. "No sleep on sofa." The question hung between them, fraught with meaning. Declan swallowed hard. "Only if you're certain, Daria. We have time." She squeezed his hand. "I am certain. You are good man, Declan Frost, patient man." She touched his cheek gently. "My husband." That night, husband and wife truly became one, their physical union as tender and careful as their growing emotional connection. Declan was attentive to Daria's comfort, mindful of her inexperience, and deeply moved by the trust she placed in him. For her part, Daria approached their intimacy with the same courage she had shown in every aspect of her new life, tentative at first, but increasingly confident as fear gave way to pleasure and connection. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Daria nestled against his side, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered in Russian, then repeated in English. "Thank you for waiting." He stroked her hair gently. "I would have waited as long as you needed." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I know. This why I love you." The words, simple and direct in her still developing English, struck him with the force of a physical blow. "You love me," she nodded solemnly. "Da, I love you." Is surprise? "Yes," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I hoped, but I didn't expect, not so soon." "Not soon," she corrected him. "Many days I watch you, how you are kind to workers, how you care for animals, how you patient with me." She touched his face again, tracing the line of his jaw. "Love grows slow like plant, but now is strong." Declan pulled her closer, overwhelmed by the gift she had given him. "I love you too, Daria Frost, more than I thought possible when we were just words on paper to each other." They fell asleep in each other's arms, no longer strangers bound by a contract, but partners beginning to forge a life built on mutual respect, shared goals, and now, love. As summer gave way to autumn, Declan and Daria's relationship deepened, as did their ability to communicate. Daria's English improved dramatically, though her Russian accent remained pronounced. Declan's Russian vocabulary expanded, particularly in the evenings when they would lie in bed, and she would teach him words by moonlight, whispering them against his skin. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Daria proved to have a natural affinity for horses and eventually took over their care from the aging stable hand. Her vegetable garden flourished, introducing the ranch hands to Russian varieties they'd never encountered before. And her friendship with Alina led to a productive exchange of cooking techniques that made mealtimes at the Frost Ranch the envy of neighboring ranchers. Not everything was idyllic, of course. They had arguments complicated by lingering language barriers and moments of cultural misunderstanding. Daria struggled with homesickness, particularly around Russian holidays, and Declan sometimes felt inadequate when he couldn't fully comprehend her expressions of grief for the family she had left behind. But they weathered these challenges together, their commitment to building a shared life stronger than the obstacles they faced. One crisp October morning, Declan found Daria standing at the bedroom window, watching the sunrise with a pensive expression. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. She leaned back against him. "I am thinking. It is 1 year since I received your letter, 1 year since I decided to come to America. Any regrets?" He asked, trying to keep his tone light despite the weight of the question. She turned in his arms to face him. "No regrets, but I have news." Something in her voice made him study her face carefully. "What kind of news?" A slow smile spread across her features. "I am with child, Declan. We will have baby in spring." Joy surged through him, so powerful it momentarily robbed him of speech. When he found his voice again, it was thick with emotion. "A baby, you're certain?" "Da," she confirmed. "Mrs. Garcia helped me be sure. 2 months now." Declan lifted her off her feet in a careful embrace, laughing with pure happiness. "A baby? Daria, you've made me the happiest man in Nevada in all the Western Territories." She laughed with him, her eyes shining. "You are happy, truly." "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, setting her down gently. "Are you feeling well? Do you need anything? Should you rest more?" Her amusement grew at his barrage of concerned questions. "I am well, Moy Lyubov. Women have babies every day. I will work as normal until I cannot." "But not too hard," he insisted, suddenly protective. "No more breaking the wild horses, and I'll hire more help for the house." She pressed a finger to his lips, stopping his flow of words. "We will manage as we always do, together." As news of Daria's pregnancy spread, the ranch took on an air of joyful anticipation. Mrs. Garcia and Alina immediately began knitting baby clothes, while Miguel organized the ranch hands to construct a cradle as a gift for the expectant parents. Even the citizens of Cherry Creek, who had initially viewed the Russian bride with curiosity and some suspicion, now fully embraced her as one of their own, with Mrs. Wilson proudly claiming credit for helping that match succeed. The winter months passed in preparation. Declan converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls himself and installing shelves for toys and books. Daria sewed tiny garments in the evenings, singing Russian lullabies that Declan gradually learned to hum along with. As her body changed, growing round with their child, Declan found himself falling in love with her all over again. He marveled at her strength and the quiet dignity with which she carried their future, even on days when the pregnancy left her tired or ill. One evening in late February, as a rare Nevada snowfall dusted the landscape, they sat before the fire discussing names for their child. "If girl," Daria suggested, "maybe name for my mother, Natalia Frost." Declan tested the name. "It's beautiful, and for a boy." "In Russia, son often named for father's father," she said. "What was your father's name, William?" Declan replied. "But my father and we didn't part on good terms." Daria's expression softened. In the months they had been together, he had shared little about his family, only that he had left his father's Pennsylvania farm at 17 to seek his fortune in the West. Then perhaps new name, for new beginning, he considered this. What about Alexander? "It works in both English and Russian, doesn't it?" "Da Alexander," she confirmed, her pronunciation shifting the emphasis. "Strong name. I like." As spring approached and Daria's time grew near, Declan arranged for the town's midwife to stay at the ranch. He also sent for a doctor from Reno, willing to pay any sum to ensure his wife and child had the best care possible. The baby, however, had plans of its own. 2 weeks before the expected date, in the middle of a thunderstorm that prevented either the midwife or doctor from reaching the ranch, Daria went into labor. "It's too soon," Declan said, panic edging his voice as he helped Daria to their bed. "The doctor isn't here yet." Daria gripped his hand through a contraction. "Babies come when ready," she managed through gritted teeth. "Mrs. Garcia knows what to do." Indeed, the cook took charge with calm efficiency, dispatching ranch hands to boil water and gather clean linens while she examined Daria. "The baby is coming quickly," she informed Declan. "First babies sometimes do, despite what people say. You stay with your wife. Hold her hand. I will do the rest." The next hours were a blur of fear and wonder for Declan as he supported Daria through her labor. She was magnificent in her determination, refusing to cry out even when pain contorted her features, squeezing his hand until he lost feeling in his fingers. Just as dawn broke, with a final tremendous effort from Daria, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately dispelled any concerns about his early arrival. "Strong lungs," Mrs. Garcia announced approvingly as she cleaned and swaddled the infant. "And a full head of dark hair, like his mother." She placed the tiny bundle in Daria's arms. Exhausted but radiant, the new mother gazed down at her son with an expression of such pure love that Declan felt tears spring to his eyes. "Alexander William Frost," Daria declared softly, looking up at her husband. "For new beginnings, but also for remembering where we come from." The addition of his father's name moved Declan deeply. "It's perfect," he whispered, touching his son's tiny hand with a reverent finger. "He's perfect." Little Alexander, quickly nicknamed Sasha by his mother and Alex by his father, thrived in the loving environment of Frost Ranch. He proved to be a good-natured baby, quick to smile and slow to cry, with his mother's dark hair and his father's green eyes. The first year of his life brought changes to the ranch. Declan hired more help so Daria could focus on their son, though she insisted on maintaining her involvement in ranch operations, often carrying the baby in a sling as she went about her tasks. Her expertise with the horses had become legendary in the territory, and neighboring ranchers sometimes brought difficult animals for her to assess and train. Declan expanded their cattle operations, reinvesting profits to purchase adjacent land when it became available. The Frost Ranch was becoming one of the most substantial in the region, a legacy he was building for his son and any future children they might have. Their language exchange continued to evolve. Sasha heard both English and Russian from birth, with Daria speaking to him primarily in her native tongue while Declan used English. By the time he took his first steps at 10 months old, the child was already babbling in a curious mixture of both languages. "He will never know the struggle we had to understand each other," Daria remarked one evening as they watched their son play on a blanket before the fire. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Declan asked. She considered the question thoughtfully. "Good, I think. But also important he knows the story. How his father learned Russian by moonlight to speak to his mother." Declan smiled at the memory of those early nights, whispering Russian phrases in the darkness, stumbling over unfamiliar sounds while Daria patiently corrected him. "It was worth every mispronunciation to see your face when I finally got it right." As Sasha grew into toddlerhood, the ranch continued to prosper. Declan's innovative breeding programs produced hardier cattle that commanded premium prices, while Daria's horse sense resulted in a line of cow ponies eagerly sought by ranchers throughout Nevada and California. Their marriage deepened with time, the initial barriers of language and culture long since overcome by love, respect, and shared purpose. They had their disagreements. Daria's stubborn independence sometimes clashed with Declan's protective instincts, and his American directness occasionally offended her more formal Russian sensibilities. But they had learned to navigate their differences with humor and patience. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Declan surprised Daria with a gift he had been planning for months: a letter from her younger brother Nikolai, whom she had not seen since leaving Russia. Declan had tracked him down through a series of intermediaries and Russian contacts in San Francisco, finally locating him in Moscow. Daria wept as she read her brother's words, learning that he had married and had a daughter he had named Daria in her honor. "How did you do this?" she asked, clutching the precious letter. "With a lot of help and some luck," Declan admitted. "But there's more. I've sent him money for passage to America if he wants to come, he and his family." Her joy at this news was beyond words. She threw her arms around him, her tears soaking his shirt. "You are miracle, Declan Frost. Every day you make me happier than day before." 6 months later, they stood at the train station in Reno. 3-year-old Sasha balanced on Declan's hip, watching anxiously as passengers disembarked. When a young man with Daria's dark hair and gray eyes stepped onto the platform, followed by a petite blonde woman carrying an infant, Daria's cry of recognition needed no translation. The reunion was emotional, a torrent of Russian too fast for Declan to follow, but the joy on his wife's face told him everything he needed to know. He had given her back a piece of her heart she had thought lost forever. Nikolai and his wife Irina, along with their daughter little Daria, settled into a cottage on the Frost Ranch. Nikolai proved to have his sister's way with horses, while Irina's skills as a seamstress soon had her producing clothes for half the county's prominent families. The enlarged family brought new energy to the ranch. Sunday dinners became a blend of American, Russian, and Mexican traditions, with Mrs. Garcia, Alina, Daria, and Irina trading recipes and techniques. The children played together in a mixture of languages, creating their own unique communication that adults could barely follow. One such Sunday evening, as they sat on the porch watching the children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Daria leaned against Declan's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked softly. "When you send letter for mail order bride," he chuckled. "Not in my wildest dreams. I was just hoping for someone who wouldn't run screaming back to the stagecoach when she realized what she'd gotten herself into." "I almost did," she confessed. "That first night at Mrs. Wilson's. I cry and think I make terrible mistake. How can I marry man who cannot understand my words? This was a new revelation." "What changed your mind? You did," she said simply. "Next morning you come with flowers and Russian dictionary. You try so hard to say even few words in my language. I think then this man will try for me. This man has good heart." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made ordering that dictionary." "Second best," she corrected. "First best was sending for Russian bride." As twilight deepened into night, Declan reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this point. From strangers who couldn't exchange a simple sentence to partners who finished each other's thoughts. From a marriage of convenience to a union of deep and abiding love. From solitude to this vibrant, multicultural family that had grown around them. "I have news," Daria said suddenly, interrupting his thoughts. Something in her tone made him turn to look at her. "What kind of news?" Her smile was mysterious in the gathering darkness. "Same news as 6 years ago. Spring will bring new baby to Frost Ranch." Joy bloomed in his chest, as fresh and powerful as the first time she had shared such news. "Really? Sasha will have a brother or sister?" "Da," she confirmed. "Doctor in town say all is well, due in April." Declan gathered her into his arms, mindful of her still flat stomach. "I love you, Daria Frost. More today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." She kissed him softly. "In Russia, we say love is like bread must be made fresh each day." "Then we'll keep baking," he promised. The years passed, bringing changes and growth to the Frost family and their ranch. Daria gave birth to a daughter they named Katerina Alina in the spring following their 5th anniversary. 2 years later, twin boys joined the family, Michael and Nicholas, completing their brood of 4 children who grew up immersed in the unique cultural blend their parents had created. Sasha inherited his mother's gift with horses and his father's head for business, eventually taking over much of the ranch management as Declan and Daria grew older. Katerina, fiercely independent and brilliant, pursued education with a passion that led her to become one of the first female doctors in Nevada. The twins followed different paths, Michael becoming a skilled carpenter who designed and built many of Cherry Creek's finest buildings, while Nicholas's artistic talent took him to San Francisco for training before he returned to capture the beauty of the Nevada landscape in paintings that grew famous throughout the West. Cherry Creek itself grew from a dusty frontier town into a respectable small city, with the Frost family among its most prominent citizens. Declan served terms as mayor and on the school board, while Daria established a program to help new immigrants adjust to American life, never forgetting her own challenging beginnings. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought friends and family from as far away as San Francisco and even Russia, where Nikolai and Irina had returned after 15 prosperous years in America. The Frost Ranch became a temporary village of tents and temporary structures to house all the guests, with festivities lasting 3 days. During a quiet moment on the second evening, Declan and Daria slipped away from the celebrations to their special place, a small rise overlooking the ranch, where they had often gone to talk privately throughout their marriage. 25 years, Declan marveled, his once sandy hair now liberally streaked with silver. Sometimes it feels like we met yesterday. And sometimes like we have always been together, Daria added, the years having softened her accent but never erased it completely. They sat in companionable silence, watching the lights of the celebration below. Music and laughter drifted up to them on the evening breeze. "You remember our first night as husband and wife?" Daria asked suddenly. "When you sleep on sofa," Declan laughed. "How could I forget? My back reminds me every time the weather changes." "You were good man then to wait until I ready," she said softly. "Always, you give me time to find my way." "And you were brave beyond words," he replied. "Coming to a strange land to marry a man you'd never met, who couldn't even speak your language." She took his hand, her fingers still strong and capable despite the years of ranch work. "Best risk I ever take." "Best letter I ever wrote," he countered. As they made their way back down to rejoin the celebration, Declan reflected on their unlikely beginning and the rich life they had built from it. From miscommunication and awkwardness had grown understanding and passion. From duty and obligation had blossomed deep and abiding love. From two strangers speaking different languages had emerged a family, a legacy, and a love story that would be told in Cherry Creek for generations to come. They had learned each other's languages by moonlight and sunlight, through tears and laughter, in moments of joy and grief. But most importantly, they had learned the universal language of love, patient, kind, and enduring. And as they returned to the warmth of family and friends gathered to celebrate their union, Declan and Daria Frost knew with absolute certainty that no language barrier could have prevented them from finding their way to each other's hearts. For some things, the most important things needed no translation at all.